your mind, lost in
them. Why did they disappear and what could happen in the future? But it goes through each decade, starting in the 50s, and it kind of shares with you the top 10 to 11 groups, history about them, their Billboard Hot 100 hits, my favorite songs from each group, my favorite samples, and it goes through that every decade to the mid 2000s.
That is honestly a long stretch of time, right? Because if we go back even to the 1950s, we're talking about the beginning of rockabilly. We're talking about the beginning of bluegrass. We're talking about the beginning of Motown. We're talking about the beginning of an entire generation of music that was just spun out from there. It's that's it honestly, it's a lot of history to
It
pack.
is.
We think like, oh, 50s, 60s, 70s, but like these were decades, even 80s and 90s that really shaped society, really shaped the generation. Even almost like a little bit rebellious if you think about it. We need a
Yeah,
little rebellion.
it's full of history. There's a lot of work to do the research, and it's packed with some great information and great stories.
Do you is there an era particularly for R&B and soul that you connect with more than any? For me personally, it's 70s and 80s and early 90s, like hands down. I'm
Hmm.
talking Hot Chocolate. You got the Commodores, that coming out from the 70s. You got the Jackson 5 and eventually you have Michael Jackson's first single debut album in 1970. Now, like there's just so much. Do you have that? Do you have like that era that you connect with?
Yeah, for me, it's like the 80s and 90s, and then the 70s. So in that kind of order, 80s, 90s, and 70s is where I kind of connect with the most. Yeah.
Why did you find like do you feel like the 80s was predominantly like the beginning or more of like the set tracker that we kind of like live by? I think
Right.
yeah.
For the 80s, it starts because that's what I remember the best when I first kind of discovered music. Like Kool and the Gang had their biggest hit, I think, in 1980, Celebration, but then they had some hits that followed afterwards. Then you have New Edition, which came like the mid 80s, which was a really big group for me, and then had a really big album towards the late 80s. Um, and so those are like two main groups. And then, Cameo was big in the 80s, Atlantic
Mhm.
Star was big in the 80s. But ironically, for R&B groups in the 80s, they didn't really track on the charts very, very highly, nor did they get any Grammys, which was interesting. But once you get to the 90s, then that's like the heyday right there. That's like the payday for like really the golden era of R&B groups specifically because they dominated the Billboard Hot 100 charts.
Well, you're 100% correct. And I think a lot of it has to stem with when you look at R&B, particularly in the 80s, it was continuing on like the soul and funk train of the 70s. Whereas where you kind of hit like the 90s and you're more in that generation of where it's bringing in rap,
Hmm.
it's bringing in harder soul, it's bringing in like, we call it hood style. Now it's called like gangster rap. Like back in the day, it was just literally, I used to love, like, especially like Salt and Pepper, right? You have these two girls that are like the baddest bitches you've ever met in your life. And they're just singing their heart's content. You watch these music videos in the 90s and you're like, can I go to their house and smoke some crack and weed? you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
Salt Pepper, legends. I always got to shout out their
legends.
DJ too, DJ Spinderella, because she was the third member. As a DJ, I have to give love to the DJs. But yeah, I
100%.
think I think for the 70s, what happened and probably what caused a lull in the 80s is that the disco era was kind of ending in the 70s. And so then after that, you had to have some groups and acts kind of take up the mantle. And then Michael Jackson got to be really, really big in like the early 80s. First, so you said Off the Wall like 79, then Thriller, and I think it was 83. And that
Yeah.
was like momentous.
Huge.
And
Huge.
then you kind of keep going from there.
Yeah. I mean, people don't understand this. When you had like artists like Michael Jackson, especially like we're talking about like when these albums were released, like we're talking about Thriller, right? After Thriller, the amount of other artists that got inspired and started creating albums that started kind of delving into those like parallels of like pop and R&B and soul. It's like literally One smart guy is like, "Hey, let me try something creative," and then everybody just follows along from it.
Hmm. Yeah,
You
yeah,
just
yeah.
need that inspiration sometimes. It's crazy.
This is true. This is true. I agree for sure. So the '80s were big because then that's when Madonna broke out. Also, if you're talking about music in general, um, and then it kind of then you started to get like hip hop. Run DMC really kind of got to be big in the mid '80s, and they did the
Mhm.
collaboration with Aerosmith, "Walk This Way,"
Yeah,
which was
which was
very, very
amazing.
very important because then that opened hip hop up to an entirely new audience that was really like rock or pop, and that really kind of expanded hip hop and accelerated its growth. And then from there, you go to like the late '80s. Of course, I mentioned like New Edition, and then you get into the '90s, and it was just like no holds bar. It was like the well, for hip hop, the '90s was like the perfect storm. I
Mhm.
like to say after the '90s into the 2000s, once you get to like to '05 to '09 for R&B groups specifically, it was like the imperfect storm because there are a lot of things that happened that led to the decline and the demise of the R&B groups, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you bring up something really important. It's that shift that happens within culture. And I mean, we have to be honest with ourselves. When we hit the 2000s, I mean, a lot of things changed very quickly. There was in it. People don't talk about this. This is a thing that's really interesting, right? Everybody talks about the crime that was going on in the 80s and the 70s, and then everything starts to get cleaned up, like particularly on the East Coast in New York in the 90s. No one talks about the crime that went on in the 2000s, okay? There was a lot of like craziness that was not only going on between artists, but there was wars that were going on between record producers. There was wars going on between managers. There was this push of literally forcing artists to do things that they don't want to do just so that they can get music out. Like there was just so much abuse and crap. So what happens is then you get people that are like freaked out and damaged. Then you get the old generation complaining how they got screwed over too. And then it's just a giant fucking shitstorm,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's very interesting observation. There was a lot going on, then and now for sure. Yes, yes.
But you do see now, honestly, the biggest shift that we've ever seen before, which is where the underground scene is dominating like nobody's business. I had the opportunity to speak to some record producers and managers that are out in Atlanta right now. They're dominating. The underground is outproducing the mainstream in Atlanta right now, and it's predominantly because people like what they're making. They get
Right.
really creative, they get really intense, and sometimes like homage to the old roots sometimes. Like, it's not necessarily just about making music and about like shaping a generation. It's like giving the people what they want, man.
I think nowadays it's much easier to get
Much
your
easier.
music out there than it used to be. It used to be very, very I don't know the proper English, but like it was highly gate kept, which means that, you really had to work with a label to get your music out there. The label would decide, are we going to release this or are we going to shelf it? And now it's very different where you can put your song out on Spotify, all the platforms via CD Baby or whatever kind of intermediary you use, and you can get it out there. Then you can get it in the hands of DJs and everyone else. It can be streaming. You can get it onto playlists, and then you're off and running. And so I think that the barrier to entry is much, much lower now, which helps the independent artists and helps the underground artists. The challenge, though, is that if they want to get their song on radio or get it played a lot, they still kind of have to work through the record labels for that portion specifically. So it's kind of like the record label model is changing before our very eyes. It's very different. It's kind of taking away the power from the labels, but they still have a good use and they
They
can still
do.
help a song go viral or get big. It's just things are shifting. And I think that the better we can educate all artists and all musicians so they can make better business decisions, then the more good music we'll be able to hear because we don't want to have these great artists where their albums are shelved because they're stuck on a label. They can't get out of the contract. So they have to wait 4, 5, 6 years to release their music. Then the time has passed. And so, yeah, that's kind of my initial thoughts on kind of what you shared there.
Yeah, and I mean, where you're talking about, I mean, Ice Cube even spoke about this many years ago. I mean, he's even said how he has seen as an artist, and I mean, he's been in films and he's an incredibly talented rapper, but he has seen other artists suffer right in front of him, and not many people are strong enough to be able to say something like that. He's not saying that, like, you know, there's no opportunity, there's no chance. But like what you're saying is that there are those limitations. It's where if you want to be able to have as much control as you want, you kind of have to go that independent route. Because if you go the route of the mainstream, it's where you have to follow their numbers. You have to follow what they're looking for. If they tell you that you need to cut something, you need to cut it. If they tell you need to change,
Mhm.
because it's their business. And then,
Right.
whether we like it or not, like they have a right to do so. They're like, hey, listen, we've had artists going back 60 years ago. Like, don't come in here and tell us how to run our business. You can see the two sides of it. But to your point again is where if you have that ease of technology, where people are able now where you could just go on GarageBand. You can get Logic Pro. Like you can download software that integrates with AI to be able to create beats. The possibilities are endless, but the idea is how can we blend those to benefit both in mainstream and in the underground scene? And being able to see both of those sides and how they've been playing out. Like we've said since the 1950s. This is how
Yeah.
long this has been going on.
I think along with Ice Cube, Prince was probably one of the first artists that really kind of
God
talked
bless him.
about it. And you could see through the example he set where he kind of changed his name and really fought in public about his relationship with his label. Like he kind of set the blueprint. And then, a lot of artists kind of paid attention, but it still wasn't mainstream. Then even I think right after Prince, and I kind of talk about Taylor Swift here, but after Prince, then DMX, he was one of the ones who re-recorded his music first ones before Taylor Swift, so that he would have the rights to the music. And so that's why you'll see DMX, it says his version or whatever. And then Taylor Swift made this strategy very common when she re-recorded her music because she couldn't buy back the rights to it, and now she has Taylor's version. So Prince was one of the first ones to really illuminate the issues that were with when it comes to working with labels. Then you have other artists that actually followed it, and now, I mean, you'll see. You mentioned like production and that barrier being low. I mean, one of the best examples is Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas. They released a Grammy award winning album produced from their house, and that's unprecedented. That really scares people because now you don't really need to go into a studio. You could do it from your bedroom, as you say, and you can have like platinum selling albums. So we're in the middle of a very, very dramatic shift in how music is consumed, on how music is produced. And I want to go back to when you mentioned the 2000s, because there's something, and this is kind of has to do with all music, but particularly the R&B genre, I'll say rock and country, particularly those three genres, because with the introduction of iTunes,
Hmm.
that really took away the power of the album. No longer were people forced to buy a whole album to get the one or two or three songs
They
that
could
they
only
wanted.
just one
Yeah,
song.
they could buy one song, and it also devalued the value of music to 99 cents per track. Then, if you continue on, then you get to streaming, and streaming gives you all the music for free. And so, in addition to being able to pick whatever song you want to listen to, if you don't mind some ads, you can listen to whatever song you want to listen to for free. And that really took away, specifically for those three genres, R&B, country, and rock, because those albums tell a story. You have the prelude, the interlude. The albums might follow a certain format, telling a story, so that when you get to the last song, the story is over. But that's gone away now, and everything people can just pick and choose.
Yeah, I know. And the crazy part is, we're talking about modern time. Like you take an artist like I was thinking about this recently, like Erica Badu. Okay, when she makes an album, it for me personally, like it's like almost like a form of meditation. I have to listen from the album from start to finish because the way that she tells the story, it kind of like each song kind of coexist with one another. And you're right. When we entered the generation of where you had iTunes, you had iPods, you can get, download 1,000 songs and it's 99 cents. Singles became the new norm, and almost like the nickel, the nickel film, to be able to just pay for a nickel and be able to watch a film. That's kind of what has happened. But I think also what a lot of artists have tried to be able to do is to either try to be able to create really amazing music videos on their own budget. Okay, so I found this out recently. There are a lot of artists, even mainstream artists, that will hire independent filmmakers, indie film houses to make these music videos. Reason being is A, sometimes they want to go for more low budget. Two, they want to own the rights. So if they do put it on YouTube and they put it on there, they can make money in revenue, even though they're not making that much money from streaming. So it's like almost we got to be chameleons. That's the reality. We got to be like chameleons. We got to adapt to each situation that's now being thrown at us. Because look, man, think about it. 1950 to 1990 compared to 2000 and 2010. It's like as if 1960 was 1990. That's what I'm getting at. Just imagine that. You wake up the morning of January 1st, 1960, and the world looks like 1990.
Interesting.
That's what happened. That's what happened in 2010. The whole world went from like kind of have technology, kind of can't afford it to, okay, buy an iPad. You can afford it. Buy a smartphone. You can buy one.
Yeah.
Buy a laptop. You can buy one.
You only need YouTube to watch. You said something else that I wanted to add to, because you made a great point. Okay, so artists like nowadays, because you spoke about how streaming and how that's different. Nowadays, really, if we're really getting to the core of it, streaming is like marketing. You're really just marketing your music. You're just marketing music to get out there. Where artists now get the money from is touring. That's why they're always on tour. And that's it. And then, if you work with a label and you get tour support, you got to pay that back. So it's a little challenging there. But they make the money through touring. And now what you're seeing is the emergence of more fan to artist direct platforms where fans can connect pretty much directly with artists through a platform, but they're paying, of course, a subscription fee or certain levels, I'm thinking like a Patreon, but there are others, there are other platforms out there that do it even better. And then artists can get that revenue without having to share 50, 60, 70, 80, 85, 90% with the label. It's just direct. So they get more of the money, which means that they need to have fewer people sign up, but they can keep more of the money. Then you added merch, which is taking on a whole new world, which is shown to be a nice foundation for revenue for artists. And it's different. So now you have artists that are really depending on touring, whether it's a major tour, minor tour, doing like home tours, home concerts. They have the fan to direct platforms. And then, they don't get too much money from streaming. Maybe if you do some physical sales, like you create a limited edition vinyl and sell that at a premium, you can get money. But artists have to be much more savvy now about making revenue. And they also have to be really, really savvy about their touring so that they're not really killing themselves, but they're still making some consistent income. It was different. It was different back in the 60s, and it's different now in different ways, but it's just as difficult, is what I'm trying to say.
It is. And I mean, people, I love this, okay? People like to play those clips on Instagram and Facebook, right? I think we've all seen this, of Kurt Cobain when they're discussing that how much they're charging for a seat, like $50, and he was going like nuts, like how crazy expensive. I kind of understand that, because a lot of I'll give you a great example, man. They had an Aerosmith concert here 2 years ago here in Florida, okay, in Fort Lauderdale. I think Fort Lauderdale was in Miami. They charged $998 for all the way in the back behind a giant TV screen for a seat. And I get it. A lot of people are pissed off. They're like, I want to support the artist. I'm not paying $500 to sit 500 feet above in the air to look at a freaking television. I can do that at home. You know,
Mm.
and one thing that uh, sadly Florida has kind of been killing this a lot, but something that was a lot more common here back in the day was there were a lot of breweries and venues here, which you still can go here. Like there's Revolution Live in Fort Lauderdale. They bring in tons of different artists from all different places. You pay $15. Drinks are kind of, like always, drinks are always a little expensive. But there's just an entry fee. There's no seating, none of that. There's some places here that they'll charge like $30. I get it. Like this stuff is expensive and artists need to be making money. But at the same time, like what we're saying at like this end, it's where there's the double-edged sword here. It's like we're okay, now we got to make profit off of touring. Okay, we got to use online companies like Ticketmaster, and StubHub. They have people that buy out all the tickets and then resell them for insane
Mm-hmm.
amount of prices. So then
Yeah.
you as an artist now get screwed over again because
Mm-hmm.
nobody can afford to buy these tickets. It's just everywhere you go, man. Like we were saying, like even in the 60s, even now, it's just there's always someone's gonna bite you in the ass. Always.
Yeah, you have to be savvy. A lot of times, if you're not a megastar, you can work directly with the venue, so you can
Yes.
work out a different hard ticket or a soft ticket arrangement, so that there's really you just give the venue a cut, 15 or 20%, and you keep 80. If you can, it's hard though, and they're smaller venues. So, and those are like kind of the club venues, maybe some of the just a small. Once you get to like the theaters, the amphitheaters, the arenas, that's out the door because that's what the ticket masters they all control. So it's really challenging,
It
and
is.
artists have to know. They have to know. That's why because I'm a music business professor, and I also coach musicians on just making better business decisions. So you
Yeah.
really have to stay up to date with what's going on in the industry, so you can make better decisions. What you might have decided in 2023 is going to be very different from what you decide in 2025,
100%. Yeah.
and you have to either keep up to date or have someone on your team that can give you advice. Like, okay, now things have shifted. You might want to go to this person or this group of people that can help you get a better cut for this city. It's so complex and things are changing so fast that it's really hard for artists to remain creative, keep putting out good music and good product, whereas they also need to manage their business side. It's just very hard for them to juggle both and still be at their peak in terms of creativity.
Yeah, because you have to juggle so much. The thing that I try emphasizing so much on this podcast, and I'm not trying to be a pessimist at all, being an artist and being a successful artist is very difficult. Okay. There are artists where, in my case, where I cannot make this professionally my main income. I don't have the mental capacity to do so. I like being able to have these conversations and just seeing where this goes. But at the same time, allowing myself to give myself an education to do something else in order to be able to support myself. What I'm trying to get at is that like there's different ways of being a successful artist, like you say, being able to make smart business choices when you're in the profession, knowing things to keep up to date because there's new technologies that are coming out every single day. And there's new ways of integrating with them. But if you're looking for an industry that's easy, this is not the one to be in.
No.
It's just not.
No, it's not easy. It's very difficult. Just to add on, because you set it up really nicely. Like for an artist nowadays, you have to kind of, let's take you have a pie, and there are 5 pieces of the pie. And the piece number 1, which is the most important, is you have to be at your peak level of creativity, producing music, getting music out there. That's number 1. Number 2 is that you need to also have make proper business decisions because you want to know, when do I release this? What do I put this on? Do that. Number 3 is that you have to then marketing. You have to be able to market your music and yourself appropriately. And I'm going to kind of combine number 4 with which is newer from like the 80s, 90s to now, is like you also have to you're a brand. You're a brand, and so how does that translate over to like sponsorships, your image, your portrayal online? That's 4. And then 5th is, which is not talked about a lot, although I do credit Chaperone for speaking about this, is just your mindset. your mental health. Like, how are you able to manage all this, stay in the abundance mindset, and also make sure that you are as positive and thinking positive and just as in a better mental state that you can be so that you can continue to repeat the process. So that's kind of like the pieces of the pie. Also, another revenue source that I failed to mention, but I think is kind of like a sleeping giant. Well, there's three sleeping giants, but the one that I want to mention is synchronization revenue. So, for
Hmm.
example, when artists are able to put their music on TV shows, video games, commercials, movies, etc., that is a kind of hidden source of revenue that can really help to allow artists to have a sustainable income while they're still releasing music, while they're still touring. If you're able to get with the proper music supervisor and build a great relationship, and then they start to sync and place your music into their films and their commercials, that can add up very quickly. And a lot of artists have broken out via sync music. Uh, Lord Huron had a really, really big placement on 13 Reasons Why. They did well. Lizzo had a really good placement. I forget the show, but there's artists out there that have had extremely big placements on these shows that have allowed them to just have a more sustainable income. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that also.
Yeah, well, I 100% agree with you. And I think another element to that is very much comes to collaboration, where one of the ways I feel that artists have been able to thrive and blossom is that collaboration process. To your point, by the way, there are artists that have been able to come out of the underground because larger artists or more famous artists found them and then exposed them to their audience, which then fell in love with them. And then they were able to flourish and grow from there. Being solo is great and being independent is awesome. But I think the really cool part of also being an artist is the idea of being able to put yourself out there to be able to collaborate because you don't know what those opportunities will give you along the way. You know,
Yeah.
we were talking about this earlier. I think this was a great example. Aerosmith and was it? Yeah, Aerosmith and Run DMC.
Absolutely.
At that time, Aerosmith was already dead. Okay, they were barely making any money. They were barely selling anything. Like they were a dying band. And then Run DMC comes along and they come out with this song and they blow up because of a collaboration with a different
Yeah.
artist.
Yeah. Yeah. Collaborations are the key. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I have three of my favorite examples of collaboration. I'll share really quickly.
Oh,
First of all,
please.
I spoke about Kool and the Gang. So Kool and the
Yes.
Gang, they kind of hit a plateau. Disco music was kind of dying. They were kind of stuck in between disco R&B. They had to do something to change to remain relevant. They collaborated with two people. The first one was a producer out of Brazil, Yumir Diodata. I gotta make sure I'm pronouncing that right. They collaborated with him. Then they also got a lead singer by the name of JT Taylor. They got JT Taylor to be their lead singer. They then released Celebration. That is their only Billboard Hot 100 number one song, but only because of that collaboration did that happen. Then they released other songs like
Okay.
Cherish, Fresh. All those songs went to top two or top three. That's one example. Then you'll have an artist. This one is top of mind because I saw it recently. I'm sure you remember Maggie Rogers and the clip she had when Pharrell first heard her music for the first time, and just his reaction was crazy. She collaborated and she opened up for Coldplay. So when you have an artist like Maggie Rogers open up for Coldplay, just imagine the collaboration. Her audience gets to experience Coldplay. Coldplay's audience gets to experience her. That's a great collaboration. And you do that. Then on the R&B side, I'm a huge fan of Money Long. And what people don't realize is that she has been writing hits for decades for different artists. And then she collaborates with many, many other people on her own album. And her own album is doing well. So that's an example of collaborating via songwriting. So you're writing songs for these big artists and they're getting hits. Then they're gonna come back and have you guest on their tour also. I don't have a specific artist, but I just know she has written for numerous people, and that's another part of collaboration is songwriting. When you talk about songwriting, though, it's very important for all these artists nowadays to make sure that they keep as much of their songwriting percentages and publishing percentages as possible so that they can get the long money, which is the money you get years down the line as your song's being played in public. And then you are signed up with your ASCAP or BMI, so you get your public
What's
performance royalties.
what's it called again? It's not called oh, there's a word for it. It's like residual income. Like you
Yeah,
get that
yeah,
is
yeah,
that yeah, it's
yeah.
it's
Your
residual.
residuals.
Yeah,
Yeah,
residuals.
yeah. Your mechanical royalty residuals, your public performance residuals, like that's money that comes to you every 6 to 12 months. But it's not that common knowledge. You'd think it'd be common knowledge, but many artists, particularly the new ones, you need to sign up with either BMI or ASCAP. I'm a member of ASCAP. You need to sign up with the MLC, the Mechanical Licensing Collective. So you can get all these different royalties that are out there from like Sirius XM Radio and other online platforms. They're just sitting there, but you have to know enough to sign up for the proper organizations, claim them, and get your money. That's why I always come back to, for artists, it's about education, because many artists are leaving money on the table. If they don't claim it in 3 or 4 years, it goes into the black box. Then if it's not claimed there, they just divide it up amongst the labels, and the big labels use that as a revenue source.
Did you
And
do you remember this was years ago. I think it was Prince. He went on Saturday like one of those late night host TV
Larry
shows.
King, he was on Larry King.
Larry, and he spoke about how Mariah Carey got screwed over with her contract. And, he's sitting there like this host, and he's like being all cool. He's like, oh, what big deal, $20 million. And he's like, she sold 130 million copies. And like, she got screwed. And then like, Larry King kind of put the pieces together, and he had that stumped look on his face. He was like, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
she didn't
Because
know. She didn't know.
you see these artists, and I love Mariah Carey, by the way. I'm a stan.
Listen,
I'm a
she
lamb,
is-
as they say.
She is the only person since the 1950s that has given us a proper Christmas song. Hands down.
Great one. But one thing, I think in the first day of my class, I teach all these music business young professionals that an advance is a loan. That's simple as that. It's like a loan. It's kind of a no interest loan, but there's actually interest on the back end, but it's not what you would think. And so, like, you have to recoup that. If you get $1 million advance, don't go buying a house, don't buy any cars. Like, you have to recoup that immediately, which means you have to sell enough music, stream enough music so that the label can make back that $1 million, and then you can start to earn money. But so many artists get stuck in the cycle of they get an advance, they might not recoup it, they get another advance, and it's just like, and therefore they cannot own their property, they can't own their IP, and they're just stuck in a loop. I think Sir Mix-a-Lot, if there's some videos out there where he breaks it down and talks about how he recouped as quickly as possible so he could make his money, he's a brilliant businessman. And he just, some people just look at him, oh, that's just the baby got back guy. No, 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 no. He is a brilliant businessman, and he knows his stuff there. And so just with like, that's what I remember. I have to rewatch the clip, but that's what Prince was talking about. Like Mariah Carey signed a really, really big deal, but that she has to recoup all that money and everything. I'm sure eventually she did, but it took her a while.
Yeah, you run into this a lot. Like the oldest thing in the music industry is the shady business deal. That deal that locks you in for 50 years and you're owned by Sony. I mean, think about, okay, this is the most wildest. We're just talking about famous people, okay? The Paul McCartney has his catalog bought out by Michael Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Then Paul McCartney has to buy back his music. All right. Which happened pretty recently. I'm like, you got to think to yourself, okay, this man started music in 1957. He is probably one of the most successful music producers, composers, songwriters, lyricists, instrumental. Just going through the list. He has to buy back his music in his 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's nowadays, some artists actually, and I hope I get the proper term right, but I think it's called like a reversion clause, where after 20, 25, 30 years, the rights to that music will revert back to the original artist. The best example of that is I'm gonna Running Up That Hill, which got to be a really big song 2 or 3 years ago,
Katie Bush.
off Kate Bush
Kate Bush. Yeah.
off of Stranger Things. That song came out, I want to say in like 85, and 30 years after 85 or 83, let me think here. Her reversion clause, the music came back to her like 1 or 2 years before the song was placed on Stranger Things, so she was able to get all that money. And so she's a good example of how, good example, but after 30 years, it reverted back to her. Nowadays, you want it to revert back to after maybe 7 or something, because
I know.
the labels are taking a risk on you, and they are funding your project, so they need to have some sort of insurance. But 30 years is a long time, and so
It
what you're
is.
seeing now is some artists are because they have the knowledge, they're being more savvy with their negotiations. Like, okay, I would like for my music to revert back to me in 5 years, 10 years, 15, but not 30. That's a long time. So that's an example. When you talk about Paul McCartney, I think of Kate Bush and Running Up That Hill, because that's a good example of how it reverted back to her and she was able to benefit by a placement, a sync, which we talked about earlier, and then she owns all the IP.
It's just interesting because, like we were talking about from like the very beginning, there are people that are still from the 1960s music generation that are very much alive. And they're old, but I mean, Mick Jagger's still performing, man. Like, you can
Mm-hmm.
go online right now and book tickets to the Rolling Stones. You'll see him on stage. So that is kind of a weird, almost parallel, because I can see for you as almost like a business perspective where you have all of these years of restructuring and rules and regulations and how to be better being able to adhere as an artist to be successful, be able to make that proper revenue. But you still have all of those people that got screwed over and fucked with still alive. You know,
Yeah.
it's bizarre. It's like, oh, it's 60 years ago, but yet they're still performing and you can buy tickets right now.
Yeah, because you'll see a lot of legacy artists. We love to call them the legacy
Yes,
artists,
legacy
uh,
artists.
because you'll see a lot of them perform because they still aren't. They don't own the publishing to their music. They don't
Oh,
have the rights, so they have to, if they want to survive, they have to perform. And you'll have legends. I want to say Anita Baker, legendary R&B singer, recently within the last 3 to 4 years, thanks to I gotta look it up real quick to see which hip hop artist helped her. She just recently got back the rights to her music. And she's a legend from the 80s. I mean, she won Grammys and platinum albums. So that's an example of an artist who is still out there performing. She just had a show, I think it was December or January. She's still out here performing, but still trying to get their music rights back. And there's stories like that all the time. And you'll even see some of the current artists, newer artists. I think it was Megan Thee Stallion signed a 360 deal, and pretty quickly soon after she said, "Oh, this is not good for me," so she had to try to get out of it. You'll have artists go to the extreme, like Kanye West. Has his, I think his was a publishing deal that wasn't in his favor, so he probably went a little bit too drastic and videotaped himself urinating on the publishing deal. But his messaging and his gripe was legit though, because he signed a deal that wasn't good for him. He just went about the wrong way of trying to resolve it. But it's still happening. It's still happening. And so, we go back to the education. The more artists know, the better business decisions they can make.
you're so right, and I hate to say this, but it's kind of true. There's almost like a level of craziness that exists with artists. Okay, where you're dealing with people that not always like. I'm not saying all artists are like this, but I feel like a lot of artists are like sometimes like mentally traumatized, or they just handle the world a little differently than most people do. And there's almost this level of disingenuous behavior where you're almost taking advantage of somebody that, okay, I'm going to throw this out there because I'm fucking cocky and I don't care. Take R. Kelly, for example. All right. The man is a sicko. Agreed 100%. He got screwed bad. All right. He couldn't read. Man couldn't read. So signed his name on some bloody paper he didn't even know was on there. Like, that is clearly, obviously, like, the man is a sicko, but like, that's still taking advantage of an artist, because come on.
Yeah.
I think the record producers would know he can't read.
Well, yeah, that's I don't know if I knew that, but I will say that if you separate his music from his personal activities,
Yes,
musically, he's
very much
bordering on
separate.
he's
Very much
bordering
separate.
on he's bordering on being a musical genius
Y-
musically. I mean,
yes,
because he was the best producer and artist for R&B for a certain time period. Let's say the late '90s, mid 2000s. Like he was up there at the top. Um,
he was jamming.
but he just produced hits after hits, crossed over. He did everything. I Believe I Can Fly. He had to do it with Celine Dion. Like he was doing everything musically, just bordering on a genius. Going back to Anita Baker, it was Chance the Rapper who really helped her get her music rights, so just control of her music. So I wanted to circle back on that loop. But yeah, it's just I have a soft spot in my heart for artists. My passion is to close the knowledge gap between the industry and all musicians, so they just know, and that's one of my passions.
It is, and it honestly shines through, and it's something really rare sometimes because there's a lot of history. There's a lot of elements and pieces that make up what we call, the film industry, the music industry, the entertainment industry. There's just a lot of pieces that come into play, especially with the history, rules, regulation, government. A lot of things have to come in. But you take people that this is the thing that I hate sometimes when people are like, well, they were kind of disgusting in real life. I get that. But here's the thing, man. We're here to see what they created and what they made. If you constantly like mix people, like creatives, mix their personal lives into what they've created, you're gonna find flaws across the charts. You want to do that right now? We can do that with LL Cool J. Okay, we can read his lyrics straight through from song to song. Do that right now. It's his music, it's his performance. Like when you hear LL Cool J, like I'm just like in my zone. You know, that's what as an artist. That's what I look forward to when I hear music. We're talking about R&B, we're talking about soul, we're talking about rock. I don't give a rat's ass about their personal life. I don't. Doesn't have anything to do with what I'm listening to right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's a sticky subject
It
because
is.
it's a sticky subject because there are probably other artists from other genres who are victims of, or not victims, who have victimized people in their personal life. It's just not publicized as much as it is for other genres, R&B and hip hop. So
You mean like
that's a sticky subject. What were
it
you gonna
is?
say?
No, I was gonna say Diddy, but that is a
Uh,
very, very sticky subject.
Yeah, that's just you just gotta stay away from those subjects and stick to the music. That's a bad one there.
It
Yeah,
is.
that's a horrible one.
But again, that's what I'm trying to get at is in the end of the day, we are dealing with human beings across the chart. We're talking record producers to managers to marketers, artists, band member. These are all people. Like especially for yourself as a coach, you're dealing with people that need to be able to get that education, be able to know the history, be able to work through things. Like you're not going to change the world, man. People are people. You could be the
yeah,
most. You could be freaking Lizzo, but guess what? You got flaws. Everybody's got
well,
flaws.
yeah, her flaws were exposed. Diddy that's just a bad one there. Because in addition to the horrible acts he did and is rumored to have done, because nothing has been proven yet, like he also kept the publishing and a lot of the rights to some of his artists' musics, and only recently in the last year before this all kind of blown up did he give them back. So
Which is not cool.
that's kind of a double whammy there. And so we'll see what happens when the truth comes out, but that's not a good one right there. So yeah.
Mm-mm. No, and people like to say, well, group culture gets complicated. I love this shit. Group culture gets complicated. Okay, explain to me then how you have a band like Wu-Tang Clan that came out in the 80s. There was like a group of like 9 or 10 people, and they figured out on how to be supportive as artists. So like that's not an excuse.
Yeah.
And it's not
Wu Tang is a unicorn.
It
Because out
is.
of all the groups that I studied for the book I released, the most common reason for groups to break up were money and drug usage. However, with Wu Tang, they have steered clear of this. They have shown a masterclass in branding and being part of a group, but then also going solo and then coming back to be a part of the group.
Yeah.
I think they're a unicorn. Not many groups, particularly in the last 2 decades, have been as successful as Wu Tang in terms of music, branding, marketing. They are a unicorn, in my opinion.
They are very much a unicorn, but they are a very good example of don't steal from other artists. That's the example of Wu Tang. And I heard him on the Joe Rogan podcast the other day too, and like the second you get into muddy waters, okay, your music is great, but the second you get into you're stealing from other artists, you're not allowing other artists to be creative. You're traumatizing other artists. That to me is like the ultimate insanity. Like, what the hell are you doing? It's like you all come from the same place. You're all trying to go to the same direction. Like I can imagine even for yourself, like you're dealing with students or people you're talking with. Like you're not going to tell them, "Hey, well, guess what? This person's going to screw you over. Definitely you should screw that person over. Hey, you should take that person." Like what kind of attitude is that, man? We all have to be able to figure out our stride and be successful in the industry. You know, put your pride, put your greed, put all that shit aside. Because guess what? The second you're in that rink, you got that bare knuckles. Go for it. You can see if it's gonna
Yeah.
land.
I think Wu Tang, they do a good job because they sample a good amount of music.
Hmm.
So they always get their samples cleared. If they need to, they also add whomever they need to in terms of to the publishing, give them a couple publishing points or songwriting points. So other artists should do the same thing. If you want to sample another artist, get the sample cleared. If you want to, maybe you're gonna remake a song that another artist has remade. Like, give pursue the proper channels to get this artist proper credit and keep it moving. But a lot of artists try to skirt around that and don't do that. Eventually, they get discovered or they get called out and have to re-release things or add someone on the publishing or the songwriting towards the end, or they have to take out the samples. Um, but the system is set up pretty well for clearing samples and adding people, publishing, getting permission. So there's really no excuse for artists to steal music. Now, if they're stealing it intentionally, they're going to get in trouble. But if it's unintentional, there's a system set up for you can kind of correct those mistakes very quickly.
There is, and I want to tell you, like, especially when it comes to sampling, which again, when we're talking about history, and correct me if I'm wrong, when we kind of came around the 80s, sampling became very popular in how music was being made. I mean, a lot of songs were sampling from other songs. And I think also like today, it's kind of where you have those DJ mixers that break down the sampling for you. And it's kind of interesting because not only like it's just sampling, you kind of understand why the artist took that sample. You know, I can understand this because like you have that inspiration moment, right? Where you're like, you start watching something, you hear something, hey, that's kind of cool. I want to try something like that. That opens a door to something right there, you know? And we were saying earlier, like collaboration with other artists. That is a form of collaboration with other artists.
100%. Yes. 100%. There's an interview I use in my class. It's with Bob James. He's on Questlove's podcast, and he talks about sampling and how I think it was Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince were one of the first artists to sample him, and he didn't like it at first. But then, I think he actually talked to Jazzy Jeff, or they had conversations. He was able to understand more. Then they actually collaborated on an album and a project. And so he didn't like it at first. And Bob James is a legend in the jazz, fusion jazz, really a legend in music. Let's just say legend in music. And he's one of the most sampled hip hop. He's one of the most sampled jazz musicians in hip hop's history. And he didn't like it at first, but because he was open to it, he learned to like it, understood that they were actually giving tribute to him. I think Nautilus, which was like one of the last tracks he included on one of his albums, is one of the most sampled songs in hip hop. And that's just sampling. Then one of my favorite groups, the Isley Brothers, they're probably one of the most sampled groups in hip hop's history. And you hear let me see here. You hear Ice Cube, you hear it was a good day, that's Footsteps in the Dark. You hear Between the Sheets with a Notorious B.I.G. Like it goes on and on and on. You hear Lady when it's Kendrick Lamar's I hope I got that one right. I always have to remember my samples.
There's
And then,
there's Ice Vanilla with Ice Ice
well,
Baby.
Queen
Yeah.
with Queen, yes. But I don't know. I think he might have got in trouble for that at
Oh,
first. I'm
he
not sure he
did.
properly
Oh,
he see
he
he's
didn't.
an example of he didn't clear that at
No,
first.
no, he
I think he
didn't.
had to go back and clear it, and then that's his only hit. But yes, I mean
Yeah,
even
literally. One hit
one of my
wonder.
one of my favorite examples. I'll go back to Sir Mix-a-Lot.
Yes.
Is how he was so smart. Is that if you remember? I'm just going to quiz you. If you think about the Pussycat Dolls, what's their biggest song
I
ever?
gotta let me see. I gotta see what they look like. I'm dyslexic. I have to sometimes see what they look like.
So Pussycat Dolls, their biggest song was "Don't You." Don't you wish you had
And it
like
big night
like
like
me?
me.
Okay, yes,
Yes.
okay. That song is really Sir Mix-a-Lot's song "Swass." If you turn on Sir Mix-a-Lot and "Swass," that is "Don't You." Now, of course, they're singing on top of it, but they worked with Sir Mix-a-Lot, gave him songwriting, publishing. He makes almost as much from that sample and that song from Pussycat Dolls as he does from Baby Got Back because he was smart. They collaborated, they got permission, they gave him his points, off and running. And so that's just a couple examples throughout like pop and hip hop of just how sampling works. Because we went from the Bob James example to
Which is a mate.
Isley
Which is
Brothers.
a mate. By the way, Nautilus is amazing for anybody that
Yeah,
like loves
yeah,
sampling. Oh,
yeah. Because
that's a trip.
when you hear Nautilus, you're gonna hear tons of you're gonna be reminded of tons of famous hip hop songs. I think it's a Nas song there, Jazzy Jeff song there. There's a lot of songs that are sampling Nautilus that you wouldn't even know. Some people don't even know it's a sample. A lot of my students have never even heard of Bob James, but they've heard of those hip hop songs.
I feel like you got to go back. Like this is just me. You got to go to the roots. The thing that I fell in love with, especially with old school hip hop and rap, is I met a dude that was old school and he introduced because I had a hard time like getting into it because like when you're dealing with like the new stuff you're like where is this coming from, like there feels like a backstory, it's like you start episode 2 right instead of episode 1, you're like hey, where's episode 1? So you gotta first go back and see like how they went from like disco rap to like funk pop, and it kind of like started progressing down from there. I don't know, I feel like especially like with your book, and I feel like going through that history and all of that, it's something that you do learn is in order to understand it, in order to enjoy it even more than you are now, you got to go back to the roots.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
got
Like
to.
that's why in my book I have a section at the end of every chapter, my favorite samples, which then you can see. Oh, I didn't know that this group sampled the Chantels. Oh, I didn't know that
Mm-hmm.
this group sampled the Whispers. Oh, I was unaware that the OJs were sampled by this group, and it just continues to teach you
Or the
just how
Supremes as an
much.
example. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Supremes. Since you mentioned them, I love to tell this story. The Supremes. First of all, when they were signed to Motown, Berry Gordy didn't really want them, didn't like them, didn't want them.
Really?
So for the first year, almost a year and a half, all they were allowed to do was clap their hands on records. They were just allowed to clap their hands on records. After that, they were then allowed to sing backup for probably, and they clapped their hands on over 160, 200 songs. They clapped their hands on a lot of songs. Then they sang backup on a lot of songs also. Finally, they were allowed to release their own music. After they released 6, 7, 8 songs, none of them really popped off. So they were actually called the No Hit Supremes within Motown. They were referred to as the No Hit Supremes. Then they released one song that hit number 24. I have to look that song up. After they released this one song that hit number
Ooh.
24,
All right, we're going
they
through it.
went they
Yes.
went where's the song? Right there. It was When the Love Light Starts Shining Through His Eyes in 1963. It reached number 23 on the Billboard Hot 100. After that, they went on an unprecedented run of 11 of their next 14 singles hit number 1. 11 of their next 14 singles hit number 1. That's unprecedented. That really hasn't been done ever since. And then they were off and running. the last song that they released with Diana Ross went number one, and then they kept going from there. Like Love Child was the last one in or Someday we'll all be together in 1969 was the last song they had with Diana Ross as the lead singer. Then she left, go solo. They had others, but the Supremes, I mean, they were only allowed to clap their hands on songs. Then they were called the No Hit Supremes, but then they had an unprecedented run of number one songs, and so legends. But they had to get through some stuff at first too. They had to show resilience also.
Resilience is something that is almost lost between the pages because you forget that you can be cocky and you can be stuck up, Sabrina Carpenter, and you just decide that you want to stand there and be a performer, but at the same time, you need that resilience, you need that creativity, and you need to know if somebody is telling you you're not good enough, you tell yourself, no, I'm better than that. And you
Mm.
prove that shit. I mean, you're right. Like the Supremes is a great example of this. Can you imagine the humiliation of being a group where you got to clap your hands
Mhm.
162 times, and then you kind of make music, and then you're called the No Hit Supremes? Like that hits you to the core.
Mhm.
And then they're like, you know what? Let's make 11 hit singles in a row, back
Yeah.
to back.
So resilience is one of my favorite of the grit attributes. And I speak about resilience on stage. And I think that this is the characteristic that is probably the most underestimated in terms of musician success. Out of all the musicians I studied, over 1,000 musicians, the through line to success was resilience. My favorite example of resilience is the Whispers. The Whispers released their first song in 1964. Their goal was to get a Billboard Hot 100 Top 10 song. That was their goal. In 1964, they released their first song. It was not until 1970 they first cracked the top 100. I think it was like 50 or something. But then they started going backwards because in 1976 they went backwards and they had a song that reached number 88. Finally, in 1979, with And the Beat Goes On, they had their first top 20 hit. It took them 8 years after that to get their first and only Billboard Hot 100 Top 10 song with Rock Steady. That's 23 years it took of them honing their craft, keeping at it. And I always ask people, first of all, what were you doing 23 years ago? Secondly, secondly, can you imagine if in today's era they were to give a group 23 years to get the success they wanted to get? It just wouldn't happen. They would barely give a group 23 hours. But still, so that's my favorite story of resilience that I discovered while writing and doing the research for the book that I talk about and I share all the time because I think it's an amazing story and I just love it.
It is. It is the ultimate story of resilience. And it's interesting just touching on this. I don't know if you've ever heard of this group. You ever heard of Hot Chocolate?
Yes.
Their song Emma. I have probably listened to that song more times than I can count. It's just there's so many emotions, there's so many elements. And the crazy thing that I like found out because I did a little bit of research on them, they weren't that successful. They had they had a few hits. They did pretty well, like in the I think like early to mid 70s, kind of late 70s. But they kept at it. And it's just when I listen to this music, I feel like I am experiencing their life story, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, they're most known for "You Sexy Thing," but yeah,
You sexy thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
for me, I don't know. Have you heard that song, Emma?
No, but I'll listen to it once we finish.
I'm telling you, there's so many that's also the thing too, man. Like we were touching on too, is marketing yourself, right? We were
Mhm.
saying this from the beginning, like we're saying you need resilience, you need to understand like this is a hard industry, but marketing doesn't mean that you gotta be like a marketing director or a creative manager or whatever, a production designer. It just means that you know what you're making. It's like, why are you writing the lyrics? It's like, why are you doing R&B, funk, and soul? Like, is this who you are as a creative? Like, is this what you like to play on your instruments, you have to. People are like, well, how am I supposed to market yourself? I think you might be able to explain this better than I can, but it's like I don't think you should look at it of how you should market yourself. It's, are you marketing yourself?
Hmm. Well, marketing, and we could talk about it in today's era. It's very complex. I think when you're looking at marketing, you kind of break it down to three categories. You have paid,
Okay,
earned, and owned. So paid marketing is any advertisements that you do. It can be a billboard on Hollywood Boulevard. It can be the signs you see on the bus stops. It could be Google Ads. That's like paid marketing right there. Owned advertising is the platforms that you own, specifically your website and your email list. Now, there's a little bit of gray area because people like to say, oh, well, I own my social media followers. Well, you don't really own them because they can go away at any moment, particularly the example of TikTok in January this year. MySpace is the best example of you building up on a social media platform, then it goes away and you lose it. That's owned. So
Vine
owned, I would
also,
stick
yeah,
with. Yeah, exactly. Owned, I would stick to things you own. You own your email list. You own your website. You own your blog. Those are three ones. As a side note to artists, if you do anything nowadays, your number one priority should be growing your email list, not growing your followers. That's number two. Growing your email list should be number one. And then finally, it's earned. Earned as if word of mouth, people are sharing just how you share with me hot chocolate and the song Emma. That's an example of earned marketing. Also, earned marketing would be if Rolling Stone writes an article about you, puts you on the cover, article in the magazine, and you did not pay for that. That's called earned. Earned marketing could be if a music news site runs a article or a video story about you. You didn't pay for it. That's earned. If you're on the magazine cover, that's earned as long as you don't pay for it. So if you break down marketing to those three buckets, that gives you a good outline of just how to market yourself. Me being on this podcast with you, that's the example of like earned marketing because you're talking to me. I'm sharing with you about my book, my expertise. When artists appear on the Joe Rogan podcast, that's a major earned marketing venue, like a avenue, because you're getting exposure to hundreds of millions of people who are learning about you. You don't have to pay. Sometimes you do pay, so it depends. But that's the modern day form of like the radio interview. You know,
it is.
unfortunately, there are no more shows for certain genres. Like Arsenio Hall show used to be a really great earned media property in living color, and I'm thinking primarily of hip hop and R&B. Another
Yeah,
show where you could appear on that people would get exposed to you on national television. But those avenues are gone. So really, podcasts are taking over. Blogs are still around. Sometimes, word of mouth is very powerful. Um, that's how I break down marketing when I teach it. And that's what I like for people to keep it. If you could put it in these three buckets, really focus on growing your email list for the own, update your website for that, and then the mixing, depending whether or not you want to pay for advertisements, and then earned is the blurry line. And then you also have social media, which is just a different kind of beast as well.
it is. And you know what? You touched on something that's so true, which is with podcasting, right? People don't get this, and I've said this before. We're talking about Joe Rogan, right? It's not necessarily where, it's Joe Rogan's podcast. It's where you have somebody that comes on and you're representing yourself, right? You're marketing yourself at that moment. You're saying like that blurred line between earned, being able to be on a cover or getting those. It's how you're representing yourself in these interviews, is how people are, see you. Let's just say social media. It's like, don't look. I get it. People make a lot of money off of social media. The way I'm starting to see it, and you're 100% correct, is don't focus on social media as a revenue stream. Focus it as a way in your marketing strategy to be
Yes.
able to get
Hmm.
you that earned revenue, getting that
Yeah.
exposure, getting yourself out there.
Yeah. It's marketing. Just don't make the
Yeah.
mistake to think that you own your followers because they can go away at any time. Anytime you have someone else deciding who sees your post, when they see it, and for how long they see it, you don't own that property. So they consistently change the algorithm. Well, that's out of your control. You can't control that. So you're at their beck and call in terms of if people see it. And then when they're trying to force you to pay to boost your post so that you can get it in front of your followers, that might as well be paid advertising right there, paid marketing.
There's just it can sound complex, but what you're saying is so true. It's not complex. It's if you break it down, like you said, you break it down into three different things, and you can kind of clump together different things together to reach those same outcomes and goals because they kind of play alongside with one another. I think also this entire conversation we're talking about, it's not just R&B, Motown, and soul. It's
Mm-mm.
also talking about those artists that realized, hey, I'm a creative person. I make really great music. I know that I have a talent here, but figuring out what to do with that properly, not
Mm.
screwing yourself 30 years in the future, you know? Understanding that, like, there were artists that took them 23 years to get on that Billboard
Mm.
chart. It's a long game. It's a hard game. But if you're an artist and you love this industry, you're creative, you want to do it, I think go out and do it. But have the right
Absolutely.
tools when you're
Yes.
doing it.
Have the right tools, build the right team, have the right expectations, have the
Yes.
right mindset. And if you can do that and you can be consistent and you can be able to be resilient and suffer through a couple of down moments, you trip and fall, some things don't work, but if you can stick with it, um, you will see some great things happen. And it might not be what you expect. A lot of times artists are like, ooh, well, I wanna be performing and opening, at the Staples Center. Well, they call it now, it's Crypto Arena, whatever. I want to be performing there. But what happens is that instead of that, maybe you're the songwriter to someone or groups of people who are performing at these stadiums. So initially you thought you're going to be performing, but maybe actually you're so skilled at writing songs that they are hiring you to write their songs, and they're singing your songs in front of stadiums full of people across the world.
Yeah.
Just be open to what comes to you because you never know how it can work. I think in reverse, one of my favorite examples of songwriters is Sia. Sia first got big because she wrote massive hits for numerous artists. And then she got big. Ed Sheeran, the same way. He a talented performer and songwriter, but he first kind of cut his teeth and got his breaks being a songwriter. And so don't discount just how you can be successful in the industry.
There's all different ways of being able to be successful. To your point, I
Yeah.
mean, there's so many different things that I said this before too. You may think this is crazy. Like even being a marketing director can be a creative position. An accountant
Mm-hmm.
can be a creative position just because you find numbers boring. There can be somebody that is really good at that. And especially if you're dealing with, production and you have your own record label, they can come in there and they love and they're passionate about this and literally save you hundreds of dollars. All right. I think that's kind of cool and it's kind of nice at the same time. But like you said, you got to be able to put that first leg out. All right. You got to do that first, figure out. And then sometimes things fail, man. Sometimes one avenue doesn't work, then you try another one. Like we're talking about like Sia, right? You go from songwriting to be able to make massive, top chart singles just across. It's impeccable. Honestly, Amani, I have to say, like, it's great when you have experts such as yourself because not only do you get like the history and the knowledge and the expertise, but also the right strategy to be able to push yourself forward. I'm not saying that you're going to be a massive like superstar. Let's be realistic. It's hard to get there, but at least give you like the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's it.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you for that compliment. I appreciate it. That's my goal, is just to close the knowledge gap and to help musicians make better business decisions. And that's what I do.
I love that, man. And I know you mentioned your book is came out a couple of months ago. I know you have a website which we spoke earlier. This man has everything on his website.
Yeah. We're still working on the website, but yeah, so the book you can get it at any online platform you want to. It's called The Quiet Storm, a historical and cultural analysis of the power, passion, and pain of R&B groups. If you're a
Beautiful book
musician
cover.
out there, oh yeah, thank you. I love it. I love it. If you're a musician out there and maybe you're struggling, or you want to maybe take your musicianship and your artistry to a next level, I offer free calls for any musician that might want to talk and see if we might want to work together. You can just go to my website, amaniexperience.com/call. And Amani is A like Apple, M like Mary, A like Apple, N like Nancy, I, experience. So it's all one word, .com/call. And I'd love to talk to you, see if we might be a good fit. But those are the two best ways to reach me. Get the book, set up a free call for musicians. And just thank you very much for having me on the show.
Oh, my pleasure, my man. And for anybody out there that you are lazy to start tapping or typing things in, we got the links for you right below. Made it easy for you. What's your social handle, by the way?
Social handles Amani Experience. So that'll get you to my Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and then on LinkedIn, which I think is hidden for artists to use. It's Amani, last name is Roberts. So if you put in Amani space Roberts space DJ, it'll pop up there.
So all y'all from all kind of kinds and creed, if you got to reach out to Amani, you know what to do. Thank you so much, man. And to anybody out there, if you want to check out more of the podcast, you can find us everywhere and anywhere at Lost in the Groove Pod. So with that, we'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace out.